Hello everybody, welcome to the GFM Talks. The topic today is a thorny topic. Unfortunately, it's never easy to read that title, the nature and scale of abuse in schools, but it is a really important issue for us to tackle. And there's a large team of us already starting to really think about the work that we're doing, and we hope this presentation will reach out to a number of you who will think, yeah, I want to do this as well. So we hope this is an open invitation. You'll get a flavour of the things that we're thinking about and you'll really want to join. So Kerry Payne is going to talk to us about the Ofsted review and what the review taught schools about nature and extent of abuse and why we have to tackle this difficult agenda. And really the headline from it was that abuse has become normalised. And we can't accept that in schools. And how we tackle it, though, is really, really challenging. So Kerry's going to talk about what the report tells us. We're then going to move on to think in a bit of detail about what pressure girls feel, and Alice Harlan is going to share the content of some of the assemblies that we've been doing with the girls in the secondary phase. Tom at AP is going to share some information about the pressure on boys and the assemblies with boys. And through that, we've been thoughtful about the explicit teaching of consent. And Jo Duff is going to talk about some work we're going to be doing around the curriculum in the development of character education, formal curriculum and the informal curriculum. And then it's going to come back to me and we're going to share some thoughts and reflections that we've been having about a collective stand we might take, the approaches we're taking currently in the secondary phase and how we might take that forward, and this open invitation to invite you to join us. We really hope that in watching this, a number of you will think, yeah, I really, really want to be involved in this as the next stage. So we are responding, thinking about culture of the schools, our curriculum, how we support students, and really explicitly now thinking about our training support and expectations of staff. We are minded to draw from the experience of our primary colleagues and our special phase colleagues who have done significant work around these types of agendas. And we're really keen that this will become a GFM approach as we take this to the next stage. So what did the report tell us? I'm now going to hand over to Kerry Payne.
Hello everyone, thank you Kirsty, and thank you for setting out that this is a bit of a tricky subject, and it is something that I know we have been wanting to address for some time and making sure that we are delivering that in the right way. We wanted to start with what the findings were. Ofsted conducted a large-scale research project and identified significant concerns. The next slide is actually going to show you the data and the statistics, and it identified that sexual harassment and online sexual abuse were the two issues most commonly experienced and talked about by children and young people. Instances of sexual harassment, online sexual abuse and bullying behaviours were much higher than teachers and leaders were aware of. And when I want to show you the data next, I want us to consider that currently the data within our schools doesn't match this data, and therefore we have to assume at times that we have unreported incidents happening. So this data is quite stark, it's quite a hard slide. When we've delivered it in assembly to our young people, those figures, they are quite overwhelming, because actually it means that the vast majority of young people have experienced some sort of sexual harassment in schools, whether that be online or in person. The vast majority of girls in this survey actually indicated that harmful sexual behaviours happen sometimes or a lot between people their age. And most common behaviours reported, as you can see, were those sexist name calling, comments being sent, or that coercion into sharing sexual images. And when Alice talks to you, she'll talk explicitly about those things as well. Children and young people through the survey reported that teachers didn't really know what was happening, that adults in the school weren't aware, or that they were out of date and not sort of up with the kids and aware of what was happening. Again, something we can all reflect upon as we go through this session. School leaders also, and something for us to reflect on, were incorrectly defining online sexual harassment as happening outside of school and not recognising the impact in the building. Another key headline was that LGBTQ plus children and young people reported a particularly big gap between staff's knowledge of incidents and their daily experience of what was happening. And we know the clear emotional impact on girls who've experienced any of this that's presented on the screen, but also the survey was able to identify the significant emotional impact if they did experience regular sexual harassment or other harmful sexual behaviours. So to support in understanding a bit more about what we've been up to, I'm passing over to Alice, who's going to talk to you about our assemblies.
So the assemblies that we've done, we chose to do in mixed gender groups. And the thinking behind that was that the conversations that we needed to have were quite different with the boys and the girls, but were absolutely intimately connected. We were aware of the fact that the conversations were likely to raise quite strong emotions in some young people, triggering experiences that they've had. And so we made sure that there are pastoral and inclusion staff on hand to speak to any young person who might need that intervention. The shape of the assembly, really, and the purpose of the assembly was just that we were conscious of, exactly as Kerry has said, that the vast majority of girls particularly will have experienced these negative behaviours in school at the hands of their peers. And we were aware of the fact that we as pastoral teams and inclusion teams, tutors, class teachers, were not getting the level of report that would be indicated as reasonable by that data. So really what we were trying to effect was a change in the attitude of the young people in the room, so that we raised their awareness of our willingness to respond and their sense of what it was that it was an appropriate boundary to be drawn. So the format of the assembly really begins by addressing the girls with the invitation to speak. And it's a really powerful message to have two members of the executive team often in the room, so that the girls can really see that that message is coming from the very top of the organisation. And so the invitation is there right from the beginning, but what we want is to begin a conversation. So the assembly progresses with a sort of an invitation for the girls to think about what it means to them to identify as girls, what their gender identity means to them. And we're very clear and explicit with them that that can mean lots of different things, and that they shouldn't feel forced into feeling that there are any particular expectations on them just because they're girls. We then move from that to talk about the things that do nevertheless kind of cohere, that research tells us are common experiences for girls. And we share with them the statistics from the Ofsted report, which you've just seen on the screen. Shocking viewing for anybody seeing those, I think, and particularly for the girls. And it's been really interesting looking out as the audience at that point and seeing the reactions on their faces and seeing quite a lot of them recognise that those statistics are a fair representation of their experience. We've taken a bit of a risk with these assemblies, and we've chosen to talk about our own personal experiences, and we've even put up pictures of our families and partners, partly because we wanted them to be really clear that what we weren't saying was men are bad and the problem here is men. So we've been clear with them that we are that we have relationships with men in our lives that are supportive and successful, and that's something that we would want for all of them. When I say supportive and successful, on a good day, supportive and successful. So we then move from that into thinking together about what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable in a relationship. And again, we return to that injunction to talk to us, tell us if these things are happening to you, and ask for help, and be clear that none of that is something that you need to accept and to sort of live with in silence. We talk to them then about the kind of pressures that are on boys, and we outline for them the kind of conversations that will be happening in the other room. So we talk to them about the extent to which negative behaviours from boys can be destructive on men's lives as well. That boys who behave in this way towards women will lose jobs, they find themselves in trouble with the criminal justice system, they endanger their own relationships with women and other people in their lives. And so part of what we're doing is supporting them as well as improving the lives of girls and women. We also talk to them about the experience. So another key moment in the assembly that often elicits a sort of shiver of recognition through the room is a picture that we have in the slideshow of a hand clasping some keys, which is something that a lot of women have done, holding the keys in a sort of defensive position so that if you are surprised or alarmed on your walk home, that you feel you could use that as a rudimentary weapon to defend yourself. And talking also about how girls will customarily say to each other, you know, ring me when you get home. And just using those experiences that we all share to spark that sense of recognition in girls about what it is that we're talking about. And what we're talking about is wanting to build a world for them, for us, for their daughters, in which we don't have to be scared, and in which we've kind of ironed out the problems that have beset our generations and sadly continue to trouble them. Towards the end of the talk, I hand over to Kirsty, and she outlines what it means to be a feminist. And this is something that we really want to kind of make a currency within the GFM, making it really clear that a feminist is not somebody who hates men, that a feminist is somebody who believes in equality, and that we should all be happy to define ourselves as feminists, and that is really a sort of baseline for allyship. And then I know that is something that is also clarified for the boys in Mr. Andrew Power's assembly, which is equally powerful. And I'm going to hand over now to Mr. Andrew Power. And I think that you'll see when he speaks to you how the two assemblies jigsaw together, so that we hope that the cohort as a whole has a coherent experience, which kind of illuminates facets of their experience during the school day. And hopefully that they leave the assembly and they can recognise the impact of the talk that the other group has had in a sort of immediate way. And the feedback that we've had from the children does suggest that is the kind of thing that is happening. So I'm going to pass over now to Tom to tell you about what he's been saying to the boys.
Thank you, Alice. So as Alice said, the assemblies were courageous on all sorts of levels. We, as a safeguarding team, we were realising that the horse had bolted in so many ways in terms of online peer-on-peer abuse, and also in the casual day-to-day examples of sexist language and invasion of personal space that we were having reported to us time and again, and of course not having reported us, which was one of the bigger problems. It was absolutely vital to us that we had separate gender assemblies, and also that this should represent a very tentative first step in a very, very long-term process of change, and, well, culture change is the best way to put it. As far as the boys' assembly goes, our title was "We Need to Talk," and deliberately that had a kind of a slight air of menace about it, a kind of patriarchal wagging finger, but also hiding, if you like, a softened approach, which is that men need to talk. If you look at the statistics around male suicide, it's men in their early 20s who are far more predisposed to taking their own lives, simply through lack of communication. So communication was absolutely key. We started our assembly with a video from a post-punk band called Idols, which featured phrases such as "man up" and "grow some balls," just to really flush out into the air the kinds of things which boys and men are exposed to every day. So the first part of the assembly was really about the language choices that are made around boys growing up. We then moved through to role models and influences, and I spoke, as did our colleagues in the all-girls assembly, spoke candidly about my own relationship with my father and his inability to be a father through not knowing how to do it, through not having an instruction manual. One of the best things I think about the first part of the assembly that we delivered to the boys was defining the spectrum of what it means to be a boy, and giving every boy in the room permission to be themselves and to be really assertive about that boys come in all sizes and belief systems and anxieties, and just to try and set out on day one of this enormously complicated and long-term strategy, the permission to be any boy that you wish to be. later on, as in common with this assembly delivered to the girls, both myself and Steve Kitchen, who co-delivered with me, were very honest about anecdotal episodes in our lives which we felt challenged or compromised us as human beings around a patriarchal theme. And I know from the feedback that I've had from the students, we've delivered to year 9, year 7 and 8 at the moment, and we're going to repeat that and then go to year 10, a year group one particularly looking forward to engaging with. From the feedback I've had, I've known from the sorts of kids who've approached me that they were really grateful. They felt relieved to hear a version of, sorry, I am still here. Relieved to hear different versions of masculinity defined. We then had to take the difficult decision to talk about real instances, and I spoke about Mrs. Andrew Carr and also about my daughter and instances of sexual harassment and sexual assault that she had encountered. And again, we all feel that is so important to model both the fact that these things are real, that they affect real people, and that by addressing them, we're future thinking. We're thinking about our future grandchildren in our case, but also the kids are thinking about their siblings and their mothers, and also their aunties and their future children and future partners. And the key thing was really, the key image was a stone dropped in the middle of a lake and the ripples that can ensue. So it is part of the process. It's a process which I'm very, very proud and excited about being part of. I'm also part of the mental health and wellbeing strategy, which will obviously inform and be informed by the work we've started with the young people. And to echo really what Alice said, we're looking for allies. We're looking to be allies. And part of the boys' assembly was that we must all be feminists. In the footlights queue today, I had 2 year 7 boys come up to me and punch their chest and tell me with great pride that they were feminists. And yes, my lip is quivering as I'm telling you that. It was a beautiful moment. So the kind of progress that we need to make as a GFM is brutally to look at the patriarchal systems which inform it and which inform schooling in general, and not be afraid of taking those things apart and challenging the things which we take for granted, particularly if we view things through a male lens. I'm excited about, in particular, the response that our Year 8 assembly elicited, where 3 boys had to be escorted from the room because they were messing around. That amongst the 198 kids who were enraptured by what we were saying. But I've spoken to those 3 students and they've been absolutely fantastic. And they obviously, all 3 of them, will benefit hugely from a greater scrutiny of the pressures on them as boys. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everybody. I've been invited to talk to you all about character and character education and how our consideration of this can help us to tackle this really quite challenging issue. First of all, I just want to echo what my colleagues have said about it being a privilege to be involved in this, because it is such an important thing for us all to address and us all to feel empowered to address in our interactions with our young people across all of our sites. In terms of what I want to talk to you about, I'm going to identify some character traits, it's not an exclusive list by any means, that are going to be really important for us to become aware of in how we might tackle this issue. I'm going to talk a little bit about how explicitly this features in our curriculum and in the work that we do with our learners every day, and then finish off by talking a little bit about how implicitly this might come through our working practices. So I took a bit of time to reflect on what would be the key character traits that would help us in empowering our young people, empowering our girls and our boys, and empowering each other to be able to tackle and address the issue of abuse in schools. There were 4 that really stood out for me. The first being empathy, courage, compassion, and lastly, integrity. Those 4 character traits taken together would allow our young people to build a trust in us and us to build a trust in each other, and also empower us in terms of outing these issues when they arise, so that we don't feel that we don't have the armour to be able to tackle these things head on. we have got to be incredibly brave and courageous when dealing with this. We've got to have the integrity. We've got to be able to understand other people. So those are the four character traits that really stood out for me. In terms of how this works in our daily lives explicitly, the first thing I want to say is our PSHRE team are fantastic. Consent is taught through our PSHRE curriculum, and they are absolute fountains of knowledge in terms of how they tackle those issues, how they have those conversations, how they have some of those more, what we might be worried about having those conversations with colleagues. They have techniques on how to deal with that. So please do feel free to go and talk to them after today's session. And if any issues arise, they will be more than happy to help. So starting with teachers, pals, in-class workers, I want you to take some time to just consider your lessons and your curriculum content. Where are those opportunities to explore those key character traits of empathy, courage, compassion, and integrity? Think about the stuff that you teach. I'm going to speak to you as a film studies teacher. We have a number of our specifications recently being updated to be more diverse. And one of the films that we're hoping to be able to teach is The Hate U Give, which is going to require us to help our young people to take an empathetic perspective, looking on at that, at what's going on there, to be compassionate about what's happening there, and thinking about, and be courageous in the way that they're talking about it. So there are a number of ways in which those character traits will come through what we're doing. The second thing is to think about the specific activities that are taking place in your lessons, discussions, presentations to the class, one-to-one debates that happen, someone reading something to the rest of the group, team sports, group activities, any number of things that are taking place. And then beyond that, so beyond teachers and in-classroom support, the wider team of people who interact with our youngsters, the activities that you're involved in with our kids. Where could you identify those positive character traits? And then this is the further question that came to me. Do you need to explicitly teach those character traits to our youngsters? Do they know, for example, what it means to be compassionate in the activity that they're completing at that moment in time? And can you pick out moments where you can share with your class or with the group that you're with a moment where someone has demonstrated compassion, integrity, courage, and celebrate that with our youngsters? Let's be really open and explicit about these character traits being positive things that are for the good and the improvement of everybody's life around us. So an example might be a learner queuing for medical support. They need a headache tablet. They've not been feeling great. Someone comes up to them, behind them in the queue, clearly in distress, and that young person shows the compassion by going, "This is someone who is in a worse position than me. Please, you go ahead." That's something that could be caught. That's something that could be celebrated as that costs nothing to anybody, but is a moment of compassion. Can we find those moments that we can celebrate? We also explicitly think about these character traits when we're writing and reviewing policies. And I urge you, as you move forward, if you have the opportunity to look at any specific policies to your area of expertise, do think about how character has driven that. Kirsty and I were talking earlier on today, remembering when we were writing the behaviour strategy and thinking about how we needed to come away from a sanction-driven strategy to one that was based around positive character traits, one that had positive outcomes as its goal and positive experiences as its goal. And even if you think about this session now, the way that each colleague, each member of the team has composed the aspect that they're discussing, that we've thought about the elements that we wanted to include, that has been done through a character-driven lens, how this experience this afternoon could be a positive one for everybody there. To talk implicitly about how character comes through, it's pretty fundamental. We are the models. If we're going to address this thorny issue, then first and foremost, our learners need to trust us. They need to believe that we will not accept this sort of behaviour. And the way in which we build this trust is by being emotionally available and showing compassion and integrity in our follow-up. you might feel nervous about how you manage in a situation like this. And this is where empathy comes in. It's absolutely key. I want you to imagine that a friend of yours, your daughter, your sister, comes to you and tells you that they have experienced something along these lines. How would you respond in that situation? Now, clearly in a school, we have the vital safeguarding practices that we have to consider and we have to abide by. But fundamentally, your voice, your response will be the same because your humanity would be the same. Beyond dealing with the issue itself, I want you to consider where else we might have the opportunity to demonstrate these character traits in our daily working lives, in our interactions during social times, during clubs and societies, and also in our interactions with each other. Think about what the students and our learners observe when they see us talking to each other, when they see us looking after each other and looking out for each other. Really, really important. They learn so much just by observing what's happening around them. And then just to close this section, I wanted to finish with a lovely quote about integrity from a very inspirational woman. Do the chest thing. I'm a feminist too. Brene Brown, who said that to her, integrity is choosing courage over comfort, choosing what's right over what is fun, fast, or easy, and choosing to practice our values rather than simply professing them. And I think if we can all hold on to that, then the world would absolutely be a better place, and we would all have the armour that we need to be able to deal with tackling the issue of abuse in schools. I'm going to hand back to Kirsty. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kerry, Alice, Tom, and Joe, for your inputs today. Hopefully, what you've heard from colleagues has sparked in you an interest in being involved, something that makes you think, yeah, I could really take a key role in this agenda. It's a huge agenda. It aligns with everything that we're doing, so it doesn't need to be an additional, but it does need to be something that becomes our focus. So I'm going to read back to the presentation. As Joe talked about strategies, actually what we're being explicit about now is expecting, encouraging and supporting how staff were challenging appropriate behaviour. So some examples there. Actually being explicit and clear that harassment violence is not acceptable and won't be tolerated. It's not an inevitable part of growing up. And what the report in stark terms told us we needed to do was to not dismiss or tolerate something that is violent harassment as banter or part of growing up, or it's just what happens. And if you want to be involved in working with colleagues around that, that would be a fantastic opportunity for staff. That would be a fantastic way of supporting this work. And as Joe said, you know, we've already got through our approaches, through our policies, through our procedures, how we can mitigate some of the risks around abuse, because it's those risks that we're trying to challenge and we're trying to challenge collectively. We don't want in our schools cultures of unacceptable behaviours. We don't want it to be unsafe. We don't want a culture that normalises abuse. We don't want young people who accept it as a norm and don't believe there's any value in coming forward. And yet we probably are existing in a society where that is the case at the moment. And that's a call to arms, isn't it? Joe talked about our discussion earlier, and we really reflected on where it is explicit. This is in the secondary phase, but we can find this in the special phase, in the primary phase, in our current policies. This is an extract from behaviour policy. And if you have a look at this, you can really see our emphasis in the GFM phase on character. And actually, if we really can push this, if we really can make this explicit and implicit, if we can model it at every opportunity, the way we tackle thorny issues is through growing wonderful young people. Just give you a moment to have a look at that. Jo talked a lot about character development through the curriculum. And actually, one of the things the team would really like to take forward is thinking about the ways our curriculum currently tackles issues such as these, but actually a review of what we're doing so that we might be even sharper in our approach, we might be more explicit. So this is currently in our curriculum. Might you be somebody that's really interested in conducting aspects of the curriculum review? And we really would encourage teaching and non-teaching staff to be involved in this if it's something that is of interest to you. So the nature and scale of abuse in schools, the report puts in stark terms for us, which is why we have to take specific action. We knew that doing the assemblies potentially was risky. We knew that potentially it would open a box. We have had more disclosures as a result of the assemblies, and we're pleased that we're able to then really think about that. As Alice said, we were concerned about the triggers this may cause for our youngsters and for staff, and that has happened, and the teams have been supporting youngsters and staff around that. We did flag with each other how we might recognise the role false allegations have in this type of approach. And we were worried about heightened stakes and tried to mitigate the risk of that. And actually, we haven't found that. We found the youngsters have approached this really maturely. We did talk about a risk that the community may perceive we weren't doing the right thing in taking this grasping the national approach. And when we weighed up all of those things, actually, there was a greater risk of us not doing anything. What we do next is what this session really is about, asking you and calling you to join. We also really thought about the support we would give to youngsters coming forward as victims. And actually that is building on what we think is the best practice across the phase at the moment. The safeguarding mantra being non-judgmental, going in without prejudice. And we really explicitly talked about how important it is to have robust evidence trails, to be really confident in our conversation with children, parents and carers, with each other, with the child's peers. And actually having that robust evidence trail is really important. We recognise that youngsters need to be given the space and time to recover and the support. We talked about how important it was in each of these stages to think about information sharing in a sensitive way. And we thought about how all of those enable staff to respond appropriately, confidently, as Jo said, modelling. And all of that, when we do well, doesn't enable the youngster to engage with school and learning in a positive way. It may take time. There may be key milestones in that journey, but that's what we're working towards. And we're also really clear and confident to think about not criminalising an 11-year-old, a 13-year-old who may be a perpetrator of abuse. I'm just going to give you a moment to have a look at the categories we really thought about of the youngster and therefore the approach that we might take. And as Jo said, we were really explicit in not jumping to sanction, but really thoughtful about the work we needed to do with the perpetrator to support their change. We don't want to criminalise young people, but we have to address it. And if you have a look at that and consider some of the youngsters that we work with, actually it's really important we think about why a youngster might be motivated to behave in the way that they are, not to treat them with the same blunt instrument, but really think about the way that we can support. And we really hope the work we've been doing has been really thinking about the support for the victim and the support for the perpetrator to recognise the error, the mistake, to change, and if necessary, identify that that young person is the victim of a situation that may have led to what happened here. And then, of course, we do have to work on false malicious allegation. And again, non-judgmental, non-prejudice, following up proportionately and appropriately. So it's not just been assemblies. We've obviously provided a lot of support to the youngsters in the assembly and beyond. We've worked with staff, we've offered optional PO, and it's great that so many people have engaged with that. And hopefully everybody engaging in this session will really think about the role that they want to play. We've sent letters out to the community of 7, 8 and 9 across the phase now, explaining our rationale. And if you've seen those letters, you've seen that the safeguarding team offered to meet with parents and carers to talk through that. And some parents have taken that up, which is great. And we want to really think about applying these principles in the way we tackle racism, the way we tackle homophobia. We were conscious we could have listed a number of things on this slide, but we just want to raise this at this stage. And that might prompt for you something that you want to be involved with. So we do a call to action here. We would really appreciate engagement with the content of the assemblies. What are your areas of interest? What are your areas of expertise? What might your role be in the next stages? What risk mitigations are already in place, and how might you respond to that? And as Jo talked through, if we manage each incident with thought and care, talking through with each other, that may enable us to really be robust in the way that we do that. And of course, the STAR principle, always important to think about how we stop and we take that moment before we act. So we hope there's been a lot there that you are now thinking about and thoughtful about and may want to engage with. Thank you for staying with us through this session. We were badged as the safeguarding team, but actually you can see that lots of different people are now becoming involved in leading some work around this, and we would really love to hear from you. So at next stage, please email any one of us that you've seen on screen today to say, I'm particularly interested in working with you on this. We've had a number of colleagues reading some really interesting articles and books around this who really want to start a book club. Are you interested in that? We'd love to hear from you. So on behalf of the team, thank you very much. This is a really tough challenge for us to take on as a school, as a phase, as the GFM, but we're determined to do that. We're determined to do that in a way that people feel really empowered to take this forward. We look forward to hearing from hopefully as many of you as possible. Thanks everybody.